They raised glasses of vintage 1982 wine to toast my failure, unaware I had approved the company expense to buy that bottle. Declan laughed loudest when his parents called my freelance job a parasite's hobby. I just smiled, sliding my finger across my phone screen where the status read, Activate Protocol Omega. Tomorrow, they will not just lose their jobs. Tomorrow, they will understand the true meaning of hell when that meeting room door finally closes. My name is Kiara Winterbourne. I am 32 years old, and tonight, I am invisible. I sat alone on a plush velvet ottoman in the corner of the Sterling family's sprawling lake house living room, nursing a glass of sparkling water that had gone warm 20 minutes ago. The air in the room was thick, perfumed with the scent of expensive lilies and the even more overpowering aroma of unearned arrogance. It was our engagement party, ostensibly a celebration of love, but in reality, it felt more like a coronation for Declan and a public tribunal for me. The room was filled with people who looked through me rather than at me. To them, I was merely a prop, a background accessory to Declan's shining trajectory. I smoothed the fabric of my dress over my knees, my fingers lingering on the silk. It was a habit I had developed to ground myself when the rage threatened to boil over. Patricia, Declan's mother, drifted toward me like a shark scenting blood in the water. She held a flute of champagne in one hand, her knuckles white as she gripped the stem. She looked down at me, her eyes sweeping over my attire with performative pity. "Oh, Kiara," she sighed, her voice loud enough to carry to the nearby cluster of guests. "I must say, you are brave. I would never have the confidence to wear something so simple to an event like this. Is it polyester? I suppose it is durable." I kept my face perfectly neutral, a mask of bovine pleasantry I had perfected over 3 years of dating her son. "It is comfortable. Patricia, I thought a soft beige would be appropriate." "Beige indeed," she sniffed, turning slightly to include her friend, a woman with a face pulled so tight by surgery she looked permanently surprised. "It is just so hard for her. You know, with that little online hobby of hers, life coaching, she calls it, but we all know what that means. No steady paycheck, no benefits. I told Declan he would have to budget for 2. Indefinitely." I took a sip of my warm water to hide the smirk threatening to break through my facade. Patricia had no idea that the simple beige dress she had just insulted was a bespoke creation from Ethereal, a luxury fashion house I had acquired 2 years ago. It was hand-spun organic silk, dyed with rare botanicals, and retailed for $5,000. The polyester she sneered at cost more than the entire catering budget for this party, but I let the insult land. I let it stick. It was fuel. "I am doing my best. Patricia," I said softly, lowering my eyes. "Clients are just a bit scarce this month." "Always scarce, dear, always scarce," she muttered before turning her back on me, dismissing my existence entirely to discuss the summer regatta. Across the room, Declan was holding court. He stood by the marble fireplace, one hand resting casually on the mantel, the other gesturing broadly with a crystal tumbler of scotch. He looked undeniably handsome in his tailored navy suit, the very image of the corporate golden boy. He was the senior sales director at Vanguardia Holdings, a position he wore like a suit of armor. "The numbers do not lie. Gentlemen," Declan boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "We crushed the third quarter targets. Crush them. The board is eating out of my hand. When the VP announcement drops next week, do not be surprised if the name Sterling is at the top of the letterhead." A chorus of sycophantic laughter erupted around him. This was the Wolf Pack, as they called themselves, a group of 4 mid-level executives who clung to Declan like barnacles on a hull. There was Brad, the loudmouth with a gambling problem; Trent, whose wandering eyes made every female intern uncomfortable; and 2 others whose names were not worth remembering because they would be gone by tomorrow afternoon. I watched them, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. They thought they were the masters of the universe. They thought Vanguardia Holdings was their playground. They had no idea that the person who signed their paychecks, the person who owned the building they walked into every morning, the person who had silently saved the company from bankruptcy 5 years ago, was the woman sitting in the corner wearing the beige dress. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a tube of lipstick. It was a sleek, silver cylinder. I uncapped it and pretended to touch up my lips, but my thumb pressed a tiny, imperceptible button on the base. A microscopic red light blinked once, indicating the high-fidelity microphone was active. I capped it and set it on the table in front of me, hidden behind a floral arrangement but perfectly positioned to capture the audio from the fireplace. Brad stumbled away from the group and flopped onto the sofa next to me, bringing a wave of whiskey fumes with him. He leaned in, his face flushed and sweaty. "So, Kiara," he slurred, pointing a finger at me, "still telling people how to breathe and drink water for a living. How is that going? Make enough to buy Declan a new watch yet?" The wolf pack drifted over. Sensing sport, they circled me, grinning with the cruelty of schoolyard bullies grown into corporate monsters. "Leave her alone, Brad," Trent chuckled, though his eyes were cold. "Not everyone is cut out for the big leagues. Someone has to stay home and make sure the Amazon packages get inside, right? That is a full-time job these days." "I am actually working on a new curriculum for my clients," I lied smoothly, my voice trembling just enough to sell the performance of the intimidated girlfriend. "It is about finding purpose in adversity." "Purpose?" Declan shouted from the fireplace. Striding over to join his disciples, he draped a heavy arm around my shoulders, squeezing just a little too hard. It wasn't an embrace, it was a claim of ownership. "Kiara here is full of purpose. Her purpose is to keep me grounded. Right, babe? To remind me how lucky I am to be the one bringing home the bacon." "Exactly," Brad laughed, clapping Declan on the back. "You carry the load. Man, Saint Declan, I do not know how you do it. Paying for this house, the wedding, the honeymoon. She is practically a dependent on your tax return." "Hey, easy," Declan said, though he was grinning. "She tries. Besides, look at this party. Top shelf everything. Do you know how much this scotch is? $300 a bottle." Brad leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper that the lipstick recorder would catch with crystal clarity. "Speaking of paying for things, did audit give you any trouble about the client retention budget?" My breath caught in my throat. This was it. Declan waved his hand dismissively. "Please, those bean counters, I told them we needed to host a prospective client event to secure the Asian market contracts. They signed off on the expense report without blinking. $10,000 for venue and catering. Who is to check if the venue is my parents' lake house and the catering is for my engagement party?" "You are a genius." "Sterling," Trent said, shaking his head in admiration. "Literally making the company pay for your own party. That is legendary." "It is not just the party," Brad added, his tongue loosened by the alcohol. "I padded the travel expenses for the Vegas conference by 15%. Put it all on the corporate card. Just called it incidental transport fees. As long as the revenue keeps coming in, nobody looks at the receipts." "Vanguardia is a cash cow," Declan agreed, clinking his glass against Brad's. "And we are the ones milking it. Once I am VP, I will have signing authority up to $50,000 without oversight. Imagine the parties then, boys." I stared at the lipstick tube sitting innocently on the table. They had just confessed to embezzlement, fraud, and misuse of company funds. I had suspected it for months. The discrepancies in the quarterly reports were small but consistent. But I needed concrete proof. I needed a confession, and they had just served it to me on a silver platter, garnished with arrogance. "You guys represent the best of the company," I said quietly, the irony tasting like ash in my mouth. Declan looked down at me, his eyes glazed. "We are the company, Kiara. Without us, Vanguardia is nothing. We bring in the deals. We make the rain. You wouldn't understand. It is a high-pressure world, not like whatever it is you do." He turned away from me, his attention caught by a flash of red across the room. It was Jessica, a 22-year-old administrative assistant from his department whom he had invited. She was wearing a dress that was little more than a suggestion, and she was laughing loudly at something Declan's father was saying. "Excuse me, boys," Declan said, smoothing his tie. "Duty calls. I should go make sure the guests are entertained." I watched as my fiancé walked over to the girl. He did not just talk to her. He slid his hand onto the small of her back, his fingers splaying out possessively. He leaned down, whispering something in her ear that made her giggle and touch his chest. "He is a player. Your man," Brad said. Noticing my gaze, he didn't even try to hide his amusement. "But do not worry. He knows where his bread is buttered. He needs a wife who looks good on a Christmas card and doesn't ask where he has been until midnight. You are perfect for him, Kiara. Safe, quiet, low maintenance. Is that why he is marrying me?" I asked, looking up at Brad. "Because I am low maintenance." "Let us be real," Brad sneered. "He is not marrying you for your bank account. He likes that you are manageable. He told us last week, 'Kiara is great,' he said. 'She is like a comfortable old sofa. You do not have to worry about scratching it.'" I felt a coldness spread through my chest, freezing the blood in my veins. A comfortable old sofa. The humiliation was physical. It felt like a slap. I had built an empire. I had navigated hostile takeovers, negotiated with sharks in Hong Kong and London, and built Vanguardia from the ashes of a failed startup into a billion-dollar titan. And to the man I had shared my bed with for 3 years, I was furniture. I stood up. I needed air. The oxygen in the room had been sucked out by their egos. "I am going to get a refill," I murmured. Grabbing my lipstick, I navigated through the crowd, heading toward the patio doors. But before I could escape, a heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I turned to see Arthur Sterling, Declan's father, blocking my path. Arthur was a large man who mistook volume for authority. He had retired 10 years ago from a mid-level management job and had spent every day since vicariously living through his son's career. "Kiara," he boomed, his face flushed with wine. "Just the girl I wanted to see." "Hello, Arthur," I said, clutching my purse. "It is a lovely party." Yes, Declan outdid himself," he said, waving a hand. "Listen, I was talking to Patricia. We are worried about you." "Worried?" "About this job situation," he said, making air quotes with his thick fingers. "It is embarrassing for Declan. Quite frankly, a man in his position, with a wife who dabbles." I tightened my grip on the purse. "I contribute, Arthur, in my own way." "Pennies," he scoffed. "Look, I pulled some strings. I still have contacts at Vanguardia from the old days. You know, I spoke to the facilities manager. They are looking for cleaning staff for the night shift, janitorial services." The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. The noise of the party faded into a dull roar. "Excuse me," I whispered. Arthur smiled benevolently, as if he were offering me a golden ticket. "It is honest work, Kiara. You would be scrubbing floors, emptying trash, sure, but you would be inside a real company. You would be useful. You could see Declan in the halls well. Probably not. Executives do not mix with the cleaning crew, but you would be in the same building. It pays minimum wage, but it is better than this. Nothingness you do now. You want to be useful to society, don't you? You want to be worthy of the Sterling name." He waited for my gratitude. He expected me to thank him for the opportunity to scrub the toilets in the building I owned. He expected me to be grateful for the chance to wipe the mud off the floors I had paid for. I looked at him. I looked at his smug, condescending face. I looked past him to Declan, who was now openly nuzzling Jessica's neck while his friends laughed. I looked at Patricia, who was judging my dress. The sadness I had felt earlier evaporated. The hurt vanished. All that was left was a diamond-hard clarity. "Janitorial services," I repeated, testing the words. "We can get you an application on Monday," Arthur said, patting my shoulder. "Think about it." I stared right into his watery, bloodshot eyes. I let the corner of my mouth lift in a smile that didn't reach my eyes, a smile that should have terrified him if he had been smart enough to read it. "You know what, Arthur?" I said, my voice steady and cool as a winter frost. "I will think about going to Vanguardia tomorrow. In fact, I will make it my priority." "Good girl," he said, satisfied. "Declan will be pleased you are finally stepping up." "Oh, I am sure he will be surprised," I said softly. I walked past him, stepping out onto the cool balcony. The night air bit at my skin, but I didn't feel the cold. I looked out over the dark water of the lake. I pulled out my phone. It was time. They wanted me to enter Vanguardia. I would enter, but I wouldn't be holding a mop. I would be holding a scythe. I unlocked my screen and opened the secure messaging app. I typed a single message to Elias, my head of legal and the only man in the company who knew the face of the architect. "Prepare the files. We go live tomorrow morning." I looked back through the glass doors at the party. They were still laughing. They were still drinking my wine, spending my money, and mocking my name. Let them have this one last night of ignorance. Tomorrow, the wolf pack would find out who really led the hunt. The drive back to our shared apartment was a study in silence, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the tires on the asphalt and Declan's soft, alcohol-fueled snoring from the passenger seat. He had passed out the moment his seatbelt clicked, exhausted from an evening of performing the role of the conquering hero. I drove with mechanical precision, my hands steady on the wheel at 10 and 2, while my mind was already miles away, navigating a different kind of highway, one made of fiber optics and encrypted data streams. We lived in a sleek, modern complex in the downtown district, a place Declan insisted we rent because it projected the right image of upward mobility. He paid the rent, a fact he reminded me of monthly, unaware that I owned the holding company that managed the building. Every check he wrote ultimately circled back to a diversified portfolio under my control. But I let him have his pride. It was a small price to pay for the camouflage it provided. I parked the car and half-carried, half-dragged him to the elevator. He mumbled something about profit margins and Jessica's perfume as I dumped him onto our bed. I removed his shoes, loosened his tie, and placed a glass of water on the nightstand. It was a muscle memory, the actions of a dutiful fiancé. But tonight, the ritual felt like an autopsy. I was tending to a corpse. He just did not know he was dead yet. I left the bedroom door ajar and walked down the hallway to the room Declan called my craft corner. To him, it was where I spent my days blogging about mindfulness and editing resumes for struggling job seekers. He rarely entered it, finding the atmosphere too quiet, too boring. I closed the door behind me. The lock engaged with a heavy, solid thud that did not belong to a standard residential door. I pressed my thumb against a sensor hidden beneath the light switch plate. A soft chime sounded, and the wall paneling to my left slid back. Revealing a keypad, I entered a 12-digit code. The room transformed. The false wall, lined with books on yoga and self-help, rotated 180 degrees, revealing a bank of 3 curved, high-definition monitors and a server rack humming with quiet, efficient power. This was not a craft corner. This was the nerve center of the architect. I sat in the ergonomic chair, the leather cool against my skin, and woke the system. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, executing the command sequence that connected me directly to the Vanguardia Holdings mainframe. Authentication required. I leaned forward. A red laser scanned my retina. Access granted. Welcome. Architect. I was not just Kiara Winterbourne, the freelance life coach. I was the ghost in the machine. 5 years ago, Vanguardia had been a failing biotech startup, bleeding cash and drowning in lawsuits. I had seen the potential in their patent library. Using a labyrinth of shell companies based in the Cayman Islands and Singapore, I had acquired a controlling interest, injected capital, and restructured the board without ever stepping foot in the lobby. I preferred the shadows. I preferred to pull the strings without the burden of celebrity. But my anonymity had come with a cost. It had allowed parasites like Declan and his wolf pack to infest the host. I pulled up the internal surveillance grid. the monitors flooded with data. Live feeds from the security cameras in the empty office building flickered on the left screen. Financial waterfalls cascaded down the right. In the center, I opened the personnel files of Declan Sterling, Bradley Haynes, Trent Miller, and Mason Brooks. "Show me the money," I whispered to the empty room. I initiated a forensic audit algorithm I had written myself. It was designed to flag irregularities that standard accounting software missed: microtransactions, recurring vendor payments under the reporting threshold, and cross-referenced IP addresses. The screen turned red with flags. It was worse than I had suspected. Declan and his friends were not just padding expense accounts. They were running a systemic extraction operation. I zoomed in on a series of payments to a vendor listed as Apex Strategic Solutions. The invoices were for consulting services and market analysis. They were billed at $4,900 each, just under the $5,000 limit that required VP approval. They were submitted weekly by Brad, approved by Declan, and processed by a junior accountant who was likely too scared to ask questions. I traced the ownership of Apex Strategic Solutions. It led to a P.O. box in Nevada. I ran a cross-check on the IP address used to access the Apex bank account. The match appeared instantly. The account was being accessed from a smartphone. Device ID iPhone 15 Pro. Registered user Declan Sterling. "You idiot," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You are embezzling from your own employer using your personal cell phone. They were stealing tens of thousands of dollars a month, siphoning the lifeblood of my company to fund their vintage scotch, their tailored suits, and their lakeside parties. It was not just theft. It was a betrayal of every scientist in the lab working 18-hour days to cure diseases. It was a betrayal of the janitors mopping the floors. It was a betrayal of me." A secure chat window popped up in the corner of the center screen. It was Elias General Counsel. "The audit logs are secured. We have the expense fraud, the vendor kickbacks, and the IP theft evidence on Brad. It is enough for immediate termination and civil litigation. We are at 90%, I typed back, my keystrokes sharp and loud in the silence. "Architect, not enough. I want criminal charges. I want prison time. And I want to destroy their reputation so thoroughly that they will not be able to get a job walking dogs when this is over." Elias. "The financial crimes are solid, but juries can be lenient with white-collar first offenders. We need character evidence. We need to prove the toxic culture. We need the discrimination. We have the rumors, the anonymous complaints, but we lack a smoking gun. They are careful not to put the hate speech in emails." I leaned back, steepling my fingers. Elias was right. Men like Declan were experts at the boys' club defense. They would claim it was a misunderstanding, a joke taken out of context. They would settle out of court and move on to infect another company. I needed to catch them in the act. I needed to document the cruelty that I had witnessed tonight at the party. But I needed it to happen within the walls of Vanguardia. I needed them to target a stranger, someone they had no reason to hate other than their own prejudice. I looked at the resume template on my screen. "Let us give them a victim," I murmured. I opened a new file and began to construct a person who did not exist. Her name would be Kira Wins. The name was close enough to mine to be a subconscious trigger, a ghost of the woman they mocked, but different enough to avoid immediate detection. Name Kira Wins, age 34, education, G, ED, community college dropout, employment history waitress, retail associate, housekeeping, status divorced, single mother of 2. I crafted the resume to be everything Declan and his wolf pack despised. It was messy. It showed gaps in employment. It screamed desperation to a normal hiring manager. It would show a woman struggling to survive. To the wolf pack, it would look like fresh meat. I hacked into the Vanguardia HR portal. I had built the back door myself. A skeleton key code that allowed me to override any administrative protocol. I located the interview schedule for the assistant administrative support role in Declan's department. Currently, the interviews were assigned to the HR manager, a competent woman named Sarah. I deleted Sarah's name. I typed in Interviewer Panel D. Sterling, B, Haynes, T, Miller. I added a priority flag to the file of Kira Wins, marking it as a referral from Arthur Sterling. That was the masterstroke. Declan would see his father's name attached to the application. He would think his father was sending him a joke, or perhaps a charity case to torment. He would not be able to resist. I sent the command. The server accepted the changes. The trap was set for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Architect, the bait is in the water. I am going in personally tomorrow. Prepare the recording equipment in conference room B. I want 4K video and high-gain audio. Elias, you are going in as the architect, no, as Kira Wins. I need them to look me in the eye and show me exactly who they are. Elias, understood. I will have the papers ready. I closed the connection and shut down the monitors. The room returned to darkness, the humming of the servers fading into the background. I rotated the wall back into place, hiding the nerve center behind the facade of yoga books and scented candles. I walked back to the bedroom. Declan had rolled over, his arm hanging off the side of the bed. He looked peaceful, almost innocent in the dim light coming from the street lamp outside. It was a terrifying illusion. 3 years ago, when I met him, he had been charming, ambitions. He had spoken about innovation and leadership. I stood over him, watching the rise and fall of his chest. Was it the money that changed him? Or was the money just the sunlight that allowed the weeds of his true nature to grow? I realized then that I did not hate him. Hate implies passion. Hate implies a connection. What I felt was the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon looking at a gangrenous limb. It had to be removed to save the body. My eyes fell on my left hand. The diamond engagement ring glinted in the semi-darkness. It was a 2-carat solitaire, platinum setting. Declan had presented it to me 6 months ago on a yacht in the harbor, a yacht he had rented using the client entertainment budget. I slid the ring off my finger. It felt heavy. A burden lifted. I carried it back to the living room and placed it on the digital kitchen scale I used for baking. 4 grams. I pulled my phone back out and accessed the credit card statements for the corporate account ending in 8099. I scrolled back 6 months. There it was. Transaction date, August 14th. Merchant Tiffany Company. Amount $12,450. Category office supplies. Office supplies, I whispered, shaking my head. He had categorized an engagement ring as toner cartridges and paper clips. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. He had proposed to me with a ring paid for by the company I owned, in a twisted way. I had bought my own engagement ring. I left the ring on the counter. I would not be wearing it tomorrow. Kira Wins could not afford diamonds. Kira Wins could barely afford rent. I went to the closet in the hallway where I kept my costumes clothes I used when I needed to visit the company archives or inspect retail locations without being recognized. I pulled out a gray skirt suit that was 2 sizes too big, the fabric cheap and scratchy. I found a pair of scuffed black heels and a blouse that had seen better days. I hung them on the door of the guest bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was Kiara Winterbourne, billionaire, genius, architect of an empire. But inside, the fire was banking down, focusing into a laser point of white-hot intensity. Rest well, Declan, I said to the empty hallway. You are going to need your energy for the performance of a lifetime. I did not sleep that night. I spent the hours until dawn memorizing the backstory of Kira Wins, practicing a hunch in my shoulders, rehearsing a tremble in my voice. I stripped away the confidence, the posture, the power. I dismantled myself piece by piece until only the raw, vulnerable core remained. I was ready to be the victim they wanted. And when they struck, they would find that this victim had teeth made of steel. The sun began to bleed through the blinds, casting long gray shadows across the floor. It was morning. The day of judgment had arrived. I went to the kitchen and made coffee, black, drinking it standing up. At 7 o'clock, Declan's alarm went off. I heard him groan, the heavy, miserable sound of a man fighting a hangover. Kiara, he yelled from the bedroom. Where's the aspirin? My head is splitting. I walked to the doorway, leaning against the frame. In the cabinet, darling, you drank quite a lot last night. He sat up, rubbing his temples. He looked pathetic. Worth it. We celebrated greatness. You wouldn't understand. No, I said, keeping my face impassive. I suppose I wouldn't. I have a big day, he grumbled, swinging his legs out of bed. HR set up some interviews, probably more morons. I need to be sharp. You will be great, I said. You always show people exactly who you are. He missed the double meaning entirely. He stood up, stumbling slightly, and pushed past me toward the bathroom. Make me some toast, and iron my blue shirt, the one with the French cuffs. I watched the bathroom door slam shut. Make your own toast, I whispered. I turned and walked out the front door, leaving the apartment, the ring, and the lie behind me. I had a transformation to complete. The architect was going offline. Kira Wins was logging in. Vanguardia awaited, and the ghost was coming home. Declan stood by the front door, adjusting his silk tie in the hallway mirror. He looked every inch the corporate titan he imagined himself to be, preening like a peacock before a display. I stood a few feet away, holding my breath, waiting for the final indignity of the morning. He reached into his wallet, his fingers brushing past the platinum credit card I knew he used for unauthorized client dinners, and pulled out a single, crumpled bill. He flicked his wrist, sending the paper fluttering through the air. It landed on the floor between us, face up, Ulysses S. Grant stared back at me with a weary expression. $50. Go buy yourself something decent to wear if you are actually going to go through with this job hunt, Declan said, not even looking at me. Try not to look like a refugee. It reflects poorly on me if my fiancé looks like she shops at a garage sale. He laughed then, a sharp, barking sound that grated against my nerves. Although, honestly, Kiara, maybe just stay in the back room. Cleaning toilets does not require a fashion statement. The door clicked shut behind him. The lock engaged. I stared at the $50 bill on the hardwood floor, in my real bank account, the one managed by a private wealth firm in Zurich. Interest alone generated more than that every 3 seconds, but I bent down and picked it up. I smoothed the wrinkles. I would keep this. I would frame it. It was the receipt for his character. I did not go to the mall. Instead, I drove 3 blocks east and turned into the underground garage of the Meridian Tower. The valet, a man named Roberto, who had worked for me for 6 years, nodded discreetly as I pulled the modest sedan into a reserved bay next to a covered Ferrari. Good morning, Ms. Winterbourne, he said softly. The penthouse is prepped. Thank you. Roberto, no calls today. I took the private elevator to the 45th floor. The doors opened into my sanctuary, a sprawling, light-filled space of glass and steel that Declan did not know existed. This was where the architect lived. I walked past the original Basquiat painting hanging in the foyer and went straight to the dressing room. Today, I had to murder Kiara Winterbourne, the elegant, composed woman, and give birth to Kira Wins, the desperate, broken survivor. I sat before the lighted vanity. I chose a foundation 2 shades too light for my skin tone, applying it unevenly to create a pallid, sickly complexion. I used a grayish contour powder under my eyes to simulate exhaustion and malnutrition. I skipped mascara, letting my eyes look small and tired. Then came the clothes. I bypassed the racks of Chanel and Dior. From a box in the corner, I pulled the outfit I had prepared. It was a synthetic blend skirt suit in a muddy shade of brown, bought from a thrift store 3 years ago for $12. The skirt was slightly too long, the jacket boxy and unflattering. I put it on. The fabric scratched my skin. It smelled faintly of mothballs and old desperation. I pulled my hair back into a messy bun, allowing stray wisps to fall across my face. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was not a billionaire. She was a tragedy. She was a woman who had been beaten down by life. A woman who would accept abuse because she believed she deserved it. I tapped my earpiece. Elias, status. Audio and video are live in the executive conference room. Elias's voice came through. Crystal clear. They are assembling now. I picked up a tablet and synced it to the feed. I needed to see the battlefield before I stepped onto it. On the screen, I saw them. Declan, Brad, Trent, and the rest of the wolf pack were lounging around the mahogany table I had commissioned from Italy. They were laughing, coffee cups leaving rings on the wood. So, Brad was saying, leaning back with his feet up on the table, HR says we need to cut 5% of the support staff budget to make room for the new consultants. Fire old Mrs. Higgins in accounting, Declan said casually, scrolling through his phone. She is 70, she smells like peppermint and failure, and get rid of that guy in logistics, the one with the limp. He slows down the hallway traffic. Done, Brad agreed, jotting something down. That frees up about $80,000. We can hire my cousin as a junior analyst and still have enough left over for the bonus pool. My hand tightened on the tablet. They were firing loyal employees, people with families, people who actually did the work just to fund their nepotism and greed. Mrs. Gay Higgins had been with the company for 20 years. She was the only reason the payroll system worked. Wait, Trent interrupted, holding up a file. Check this out. HR just sent over a last-minute addition for the assistant interview slot. A referral from your dad, Declan. Declan looked up. My dad. He has not worked here in a decade. Who is it? Name is Kira Wins, Trent read, squinting at the resume I had planted. GED, community college dropout, fired from a diner for spilling soup, divorced, 2 kids. Jesus. This resume is a cry for help written in Comic Sans. Brad snatched the file and looked at the attached photo, a grainy, unflattering picture I had staged. He burst out laughing. Oh my God, Brad crowed. Declan, look at this. Look at her eyes. She has that same deer-in-the-headlights look as your wife. She looks exactly like Kiara, just poorer, if that is possible. Declan took the file. He studied it, a cruel smirk spreading across his face. She does look like her, he mused. The same pathetic neediness. My dad must be playing a joke, or maybe he thinks this is the level of talent we deserve. Trash it, Trent asked, reaching for the shredder. No, Declan said, holding up a hand. Bring her in. I want to see this. I want to see what a female version of failure looks like in person. It has been a stressful week. I could use a little entertainment. Let us see if we can make her cry. I bet she cries exactly like Kiara does when I tell her the dinner is cold. You are sick. Man, Brad laughed. I love it. Elias, I whispered, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. Did you get that? Recorded in 4K, ma'am. Elias replied. Every word, every laugh. The intent to harass is explicit. Good, because I am on my way. I left the penthouse. I left the tablet. I took only a worn, fake leather purse containing a battered resume and a silent smartphone running the recording app. I arrived at Vanguardia Holdings 20 minutes later. The building soared into the sky, a monolith of glass and steel that represented my life's work. I usually entered through the private executive garage, whisked up in a silent elevator. Today, I walked through the revolving front doors like a commoner. The lobby was impressive. I had to admit, high ceilings, abstract art, polished granite floors, but the atmosphere was wrong. It was cold. The air conditioning was set too high. A subtle aggression. I walked toward the security desk, the guard, a heavy-set man named Hank, whom I had never met personally, was watching a football game on his phone. He did not look up. Excuse me, I said, pitching my voice to be soft, hesitant. I am here for an interview, Hank sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation of annoyance. He slowly lifted his eyes, scanning my cheap suit and messy hair with open disdain. Name, he barked. Kira Wins. I have an appointment with Mr. Sterling at 9 o'clock. He checked his list, taking his sweet time. Wins. Yeah, you are early. Sit over there. Do not block the flow of traffic. Do I need a badge? Sit. Over. There, he repeated, pointing a meaty finger at a bench in the far corner, away from the comfortable seating area reserved for clients. "Someone will come down when they are good and ready." "Thank you," I whispered, scurrying away. I sat on the hard bench. From this vantage point, I could see everything. I saw the receptionists flinch every time the elevator chimed, terrified that an executive might step out. I saw the way the junior staff walked with their heads down, hugging the walls, trying to be invisible. This was the culture Declan and his friends had built, a culture of fear. A group of men in expensive suits walked by clients. Likely. They laughed loudly, taking up the entire width of the hallway, forcing a young female intern to step into a decorative plant to avoid being run over. They did not apologize. They did not even notice her. 10 minutes passed, then 20. They were making me wait on purpose. It was a power move, a classic intimidation tactic. Finally, at 9:15, a young woman with red-rimmed eyes appeared. She held a clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Ms. Wins?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes." I stood up, clutching my purse. "That is me. Follow me, please." We walked to the elevator banks. The woman, whose badge read Sarah, HR coordinator, did not make eye contact. She pressed the button for the 30th floor, as the doors slid shut, enclosing us in the metal box. Sarah let out a small, involuntary sob. She quickly covered her mouth, her eyes darting to me in panic. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Allergies." "It is okay," I said, keeping my head down. "I understand." The elevator stopped at the 15th floor. 2 more women got in. They were dressed professionally, but their body language was defeated. They huddled in the back corner, ignoring me and Sarah. "Did you hear?" the taller one whispered. "Declan is in a mood today. He screamed at Julie because his coffee was 2 degrees too cold. He threw the cup at the wall." "I know," the other woman replied, wiping a tear from her cheek. "Trent cornered me in the copy room again. He touched my hair. He said if I wanted to keep my performance bonus, I should smile more. I can't do this anymore. Lisa, I can't, but I need the insurance for my mom." "We can't go to HR," Lisa hissed. "Declan owns HR. Remember what happened to Brenda? She filed a complaint and was fired for gross incompetence the next day. They blacklisted her." I stood frozen, staring at the floor numbers ticking upward. 24, 25. My heart was hammering against my ribs, not from fear, but from a fierce, protective fury. These were my people. These were the women who made my company run, and they were being hunted in their own workplace. I discreetly glanced at their badges: Lisa Monroe, Senior Analyst; Emily Chen, Marketing Associate. I memorized the names. I locked them away in the vault of my mind. "Just keep your head down," Lisa whispered as the elevator slowed for the 30th floor. "Maybe they will fire us today and put us out of our misery." The doors opened. The executive floor. It smelled of leather and ozone. "This is it," Sarah said, stepping out. "Good luck, Ms. Wins. You are going to need it." I stepped out onto the plush carpet. The hallway was lined with portraits of past executives, mostly white men, mostly stern. At the end of the hall, the double doors to the conference room loomed like the gates of a fortress. Inside those doors, Declan was waiting to make me a punchline. He was waiting to strip Kira Wins of her dignity for his own amusement. I took a deep breath, letting my shoulders slump, letting my hands tremble. I adjusted my glasses, making sure they were crooked. I was ready. I was the sheep walking into the slaughterhouse. But the wolf did not know that the sheep was made of iron, and she had brought the butcher with her. The heavy mahogany doors of the executive conference room swung open with a hushed, pneumatic sigh, revealing the inner sanctum of the wolf pack. I stepped across the threshold, my cheap heels sinking into the plush carpeting, clutching my battered purse to my chest like a shield. The room smelled of stale espresso, expensive leather, and the sharp, metallic tang of aggressive cologne. At the far end of the room, seated around the long, oval table, were 5 men. They did not look up when I entered. They did not pause their conversation. Declan sat at the head of the table. His chair spun slightly to the side so he could face the window, though his attention was entirely focused on the smartphone in his hand. His feet, clad in Italian loafers that cost more than my fictional counterpart made in 3 months, were resting comfortably on the polished wood surface of the table. Brad sat to his right. Leaning back so far, his chair balanced precariously on 2 legs. Trent Miller and 2 other junior executives, Mason and a man I recognized as Greg. The new hire from logistics were huddled around a tablet, snickering at something on the screen. I stood by the door, waiting. The silence from my end stretched out. Thick and uncomfortable, I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 10, 20. Finally, I cleared my throat. A soft, pathetic sound I had practiced in the mirror that morning. "Excuse me?" I whispered. I am here for the interview." Declan stopped scrolling. He let out a long, exaggerated sigh, the kind a parent makes when a child asks a stupid question for the 10th time. He slowly lowered his feet from the table and swiveled his chair to face me. For a heartbeat, time suspended. He looked directly at me. He looked at the shape of my face, the color of my eyes, the curve of my jaw. This was the man who had proposed to me, who had slept beside me for 3 years, who claimed to love me. But he did not see Kiara Winterbourne. He saw the muddy brown suit. He saw the messy, unwashed hair. He saw the grayish pallor of my skin and the hunch of my shoulders. His gaze slid over me with the same disinterest one might show a stain on the wallpaper. The disguise was effective, yes, but the true camouflage was his own narcissism. He simply could not conceive that his trophy could ever look this broken. "So," Declan said, his voice flat, "you are the charity case my father sent over." "My name is Kira," I said, my voice trembling. "Kira wins." "I did not ask for your name," Declan snapped. "I stated a fact. You are here because my father has a soft spot for lost causes. Do not mistake this meeting for an actual opportunity." Brad chuckled, finally tearing his eyes away from the tablet. He picked up a manila folder from the table, my resume. He weighed it in his hand as if judging the worth of my entire life. "Kira wins," Brad read aloud, mocking the cadence of my name. "GED recipient. Terminated from the Salty Spoon Diner. Seriously, what did you do? Drop the toast?" I had a scheduling conflict. I lied, keeping my eyes fixed on the carpet. "My daughter was sick. I could not find a sitter." "A scheduling conflict," Brad repeated, looking at the others with a grin. "Did you hear that? Boys, she calls missing a shift at a diner a scheduling conflict. That is adorable." He flicked his wrist. The folder sailed through the air, spinning lazily before landing on the floor 5 feet in front of me. "Pick it up," Brad commanded. I froze. "Excuse me?" I said, "Pick it up," Brad said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing register. "Consider it your first aptitude test. Can you follow basic instructions? Can you bend down without snapping that cheap polyester skirt?" The humiliation burned, hot and sharp, but I forced myself to move. I took a shaky step forward. I bent my knees, keeping my head down, and reached for the folder. My hand trembled visibly as I grasped the paper. I made sure to let them see the tremor. I wanted them to feel powerful. I wanted them to feel safe in their cruelty. "Good girl," Trent said, leering. "She takes direction well. That is a rare skill." I straightened up, hugging the folder to my chest. "I really need this job. Sir, I have 2 children. My rent is past due. I will do anything. I am a hard worker." Declan laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "You think hard work matters here? You think sweating makes you valuable?" He stood up and walked around the table, approaching me slowly. He circled me like a predator inspecting a wounded animal. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could smell the remnants of the whiskey he had drunk the night before. "Look at this office. Kira," Declan said, gesturing to the panoramic view of the city skyline, a view I owned. "This is the top of the food chain. We make decisions that shift markets. We move millions of dollars with a single email. What makes you think you deserve to breathe the same air conditioning as us? What possible skill do you have, other than wiping tables and crying about your rent? I looked up at him, letting my eyes fill with tears. I have managed inventory, I stammered, injecting a sudden, surprising flash of competence into my act. At the diner, I reorganized the supply chain logistics. I reduced food waste by 18% by implementing a first-in, first-out system for perishables and renegotiating terms with local vendors to align delivery schedules with peak demand hours. The room went silent. The answer was technically perfect. It was a textbook answer for an operations manager, delivered in the voice of a frightened mouse. Declan blinked. For a second, a flicker of confusion crossed his face. He recognized the jargon. He recognized the logic. Then, he crushed it. "Oh my God," Declan groaned, throwing his head back. "She learned buzzwords. Did you read that in a Business for Dummies book at the library?" "First in, first out," Brad mocked in a high-pitched, squeaky voice. "Renegotiating terms. Listen to her. She thinks managing burger buns is the same as managing biotech futures. It is adorable, really," Trent added, "like a dog walking on its hind legs." Declan leaned in close to my face. "Let me explain something to you. Kira, we do not need someone to count burger buns. We need people who fit the culture. And looking at you..." He raked his eyes over my outfit again. "You fit in a soup kitchen, not a boardroom." "Please," I whispered, stepping back. "I am a quick learner. I can handle administrative tasks. I can manage calendars. Can you handle stress relief?" Trent interrupted. I looked at Trent. He was slouching in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. He tapped a pen against his chin, his eyes focused on my legs. "Excuse me?" I asked. "The job title is Administrative Assistant," Trent drawled. "But we work long hours here, late nights, sometimes, overnight. The team gets tense. We need someone who can help us unwind." He winked, a slow, grotesque gesture. "If you are willing to be a personal assistant, emphasis on the personal, I might be able to convince Declan to overlook the fact that you dress like a librarian from 1995. My stomach turned. The sexual harassment was blatant. It was gross, and it was exactly what I needed for the legal file. Are you asking me to do things that are not in the job description?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "I am offering you a lifeline, sweetheart," Trent said. "It pays extra, cash, off the books. Think of it as a night shift bonus." "But," I looked around the room, feigning shock. "Is that allowed? Does the company not have a code of ethics? I thought Vanguardia had strict policies about workplace conduct." The reaction was instantaneous. Brad slammed his hand on the table, howling with laughter. Mason and Greg joined in, shaking their heads. Even Declan cracked a smile, though his was more of a sneer. "Code of ethics," Brad gasped, wiping a tear from his eye. "Oh, that is rich. Did you hear that?" Declan. "She wants to know about the code of ethics." Declan shook his head, looking at me with pure pity. "You really are clueless, aren't you?" He walked back to the head of the table and sat down, resuming his position of absolute authority. "Let me tell you a secret. Kira," Declan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "the code of ethics is for the little people. It is for the worker bees in the cubicles downstairs. It is to keep them in line. It does not apply to us." He spread his arms wide. "We are the revenue generators. We are the gods of this little universe. We write the rules, and if we want to break them, we break them." "But surely there is someone above you," I pressed, pushing him toward the edge of the cliff. "Human resources, the CEO." Declan's face hardened. The mention of the CEO seemed to touch a nerve. "HR works for me," he spat. "And the CEO, the architect, nobody has ever seen him, for all I know. He is a computer program, or a senile old man dying in a Swiss chalet, I run this division. I am the law here." He picked up a heavy crystal paperweight and slammed it down for emphasis. "I can fire anyone I want," Declan declared, his voice rising. "I can fire the VP of marketing. I can fire the head of R&D. Hell, I could fire my own wife if she worked here. Actually," he paused, a cruel glint entering his eyes. "You remind me of her," he said softly. "My fiancé, Kiara." My heart hammered against my ribs. "I do." "Yeah," Declan said. "She is useless too. Just sits at home, playing with her little blog, spending my money. I have to carry her through life just like I would have to carry you. It is exhausting, honestly. Sometimes I wish she did work here just so I could have the pleasure of firing her, just to watch her face when I tell her she is not good enough." He looked at me. But he was seeing me. He was projecting all his hidden resentment, all his toxic masculinity onto the canvas of my disguised face. "You represent everything I hate," Declan said, his voice cold and final. "Weakness, poverty, desperation. I do not want to see that when I walk into my office. I want to see winners. And you, Kira Wins, are a born loser." He picked up my resume from the table, the copy he had, not the one I had picked up from the floor. He held it up with two hands. "This interview is over," he stated. With a sharp, violent motion, he ripped the paper in half. Then he ripped the halves again. He stood up and threw the confetti of my manufactured life into the air. The pieces fluttered down around me like snow. "Get out," Declan said. "And if I see your face in this building again, I will have security throw you into the street, literally." "But sir," I whispered, clutching my purse. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." "That sounds like a you problem," Brad called out. "Try the homeless shelter down the street. I hear they are hiring soup ladlers." "Scram," Trent added, shooing me away with his hand. "Before we call the cops for trespassing." I stood there for one final second, burning the image into my mind. Declan, standing tall and proud amidst the torn paper. Brad, laughing. Trent, leering. They looked like kings. "Thank you for your time," I said, my voice breaking perfectly on the last word. I turned and ran. I stumbled slightly as I reached the door, hearing a fresh wave of laughter erupt behind me. "Pathetic," I heard Declan say as the heavy doors began to close. "Absolute trash." I pushed through the doors and into the hallway. The moment the latch clicked shut, the sob I had been holding back vanished. I straightened my spine. I adjusted my glasses. I walked toward the elevator, my stride lengthening. I reached up and touched the small pearl earring in my left ear. "Elias," I said, my voice calm, steady, and cold as liquid nitrogen. "Tell me you got all of that." "Crystal clear, Ms. Winterbourne," Elias's voice replied in my ear. The admission of ignoring ethics, the sexual harassment proposition from Trent, the verbal abuse, and Declan's explicit statement that he is the law and untouchable. It is devastating." "It is not devastating, Elias," I corrected, pressing the call button for the elevator. "It is perfect." I watched the numbers count down. "Prepare the boardroom," I commanded, "and call the FBI. Tell them to bring extra handcuffs. The interview is over. The execution begins in 1 hour." I stepped into the elevator, leaving Kira Wins behind on the executive floor. The architect was descending, and she was bringing the storm with her. I stumbled out of the conference room, my shoulders shaking with theatrical sobs. To any onlooker in the hallway, I was a broken woman, another casualty of the cutthroat corporate world. I kept my head down, shielding my face with the tattered remnants of my purse, and hurried toward the elevator bank. But I did not press the button for the main lobby. Instead, I walked past the public elevators to the far end of the corridor, where a sleek, unmarked brushed steel door blended seamlessly into the wall. It was the service elevator, or so the floor plans claimed. I pressed my thumb against a barely visible sensor panel disguised as a screw head. A soft click echoed, and the doors slid open instantly. I stepped inside. The moment the doors sealed shut, the transformation began. The sobbing stopped abruptly, cut off like a switch had been flipped. I straightened my spine, rolling my shoulders back to shed the weight of Kira Wins's desperation. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks with a decisive swipe of my hand. "Take me up," I commanded the voice-activated system. The elevator surged upward smoothly. Bypassing the executive floors and heading straight for the penthouse level, the inner sanctum known only to a select few. Waiting for me inside the cabin was Elias. He stood rigid, holding a silver tray with a warm, lemon-scented towel and a garment bag emblazoned with the logo of my personal tailor in Milan. His face was pale, his jaw set tight. He had been listening to the audio feed. "Are you all right, Ms. Winterbourne?" he asked, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "What they said to you, it was necessary," I cut him off. Taking the warm towel, I scrubbed my face vigorously, removing the layers of pale makeup and the gray contouring that had made me look ill. "Do not pity me, Elias. Pity them. They just handed us the keys to their own cells." I looked at my reflection in the polished metal of the elevator wall. Kira Wins was fading, and the architect was emerging. "We have Trent on record soliciting sexual favors for employment," I listed, tossing the used towel onto the tray. "We have Declan admitting to overriding HR protocols and firing staff based on personal vendettas. We have Brad mocking poverty and explicitly stating they ignore the code of ethics. And we have Declan claiming he is the law. It is a prosecutor's dream." The elevator chimed softly. Penthouse level. The doors opened into my private dressing suite, a stark contrast to the chaotic office below. It was cool, quiet, and smelled of white tea. "You have 20 minutes before the meeting," Elias said, hanging the garment bag on the valet stand. "The board has been assembled in the grand boardroom. They believe it is a quarterly strategy review. I have not told them about the entertainment." "Good," I said, unbuttoning the cheap, scratchy jacket of Kira Wins and letting it drop to the floor. I stepped out of the scuffed shoes and kicked them aside. I want their reactions to be genuine. I unzipped the garment bag. Inside was my armor, a custom-made Armani Privé suit in a deep, charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass, a silk blouse in ivory white, and the pièce de résistance, a necklace of raw, uncut diamonds that looked like jagged shards of ice. As I dressed, my phone buzzed on the vanity table. It was my personal cell, the one Declan thought belonged to his useless fiancé. I picked it up, a message from Declan. "Hubby, you won't believe the morning I've had. HR sent in this absolute train wreck of a woman. Looked just like a homeless version of you. It was hilarious. I almost felt bad for her." "Almost. I'm going to be late tonight. The boys and I are going out to celebrate dodging a bullet. Don't wait up." I stared at the screen. "A homeless version of you." Hilarious. The cruelty was so casual, so ingrained in him that he shared it with me as if it were a funny anecdote. He thought we were partners in his disdain for the world. He had no idea he was texting the executioner. I typed a reply, my fingers flying across the screen. "Kiara." "Oh, wow. That sounds intense. Don't worry about tonight. I have a very important meeting myself. Go celebrate. You deserve everything that's coming to you." I hit send. It was the truth. Every word of it. Downstairs, 30 floors below. The atmosphere was shifting. I pulled up the security feed on the dressing room monitor while I fastened my diamond necklace. Declan and the wolf pack were leaving the conference room, high-fiving each other. They looked pumped, adrenaline coursing through their veins after their little power trip. "Drinks on me," Brad announced, pulling out his wallet. "Let us hit the Onyx Lounge. It is only 10 a.m., but it is 5 o'clock somewhere." "I am in," Trent agreed. "I need to wash the smell of poverty off me." They walked toward the elevators, heading for the lobby. They were going to leave the building in the middle of the workday to go drinking. Typical. I watched as Declan approached the ATM in the lobby to withdraw cash for the cab. He inserted his company credit card, the Platinum Elite card issued by Vanguardia. He punched in his PIN. He waited. The screen flashed red. Transaction declined. Contact administrator. Declan frowned. He tried again. Declined. "What the hell?" he muttered, loud enough for the lobby microphone to pick up. "Hey, Brad. Spot me 100. My chip is acting up." Brad shrugged and pulled out his own company card. He swiped it at the concierge desk to pay for a car service. Declined. "Mine too," Brad said, looking confused. "System error. The network must be down." "Try mine," Trent offered. Declined. A ripple of unease moved through the group. One card failing was a glitch, all of them failing at once. That was a pattern. "Maybe the bank flagged them for fraud because of the Vegas charges," Mason whispered nervously. "Shut up," Declan snapped. "Nobody flagged anything. I approve the fraud alerts. It is just a system outage. I will call IT." He pulled out his phone to dial. But before he could connect, a synchronized chime echoed through the lobby. It was the sound of every corporate phone receiving a priority alert simultaneously. Psst, 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 psst. Declan looked at his screen. Brad looked at his. The receptionist looked at theirs. Even the security guard. Hank looked at his. I watched Declan's face as he read the email I had just broadcasted. Urgent, mandatory executive assembly. Time immediate. Location Grand Boardroom. 45th floor. Presiding the chairman of the board. Attendance required. No excuses. "The chairman," Declan read aloud, his voice losing some of its swagger. "Who the hell is the chairman? I thought the board was run by a committee." "Rumor is, it is some old German guy," Brad said, looking pale. "Von something, reclusive, ruthless. They say he fires people for sneezing." "Why is he here?" Trent asked, his eyes darting around. "And why now?" "Maybe he's here to announce the promotions personally," Declan said, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Think about it. We just crushed the quarterly numbers. He probably flew in to give us the VP title face-to-face. That explains the card glitch. They are probably issuing us new black cards with higher limits." "You think?" Brad asked, hope warring with fear in his eyes. "I know," Declan lied, adjusting his tie. "I am the top performer in this company. Why else would he call an assembly? Come on, let us go meet the wizard." He led the way back to the elevators. Pressing the button for the 45th floor, he was trying to project confidence, but I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip on the high-definition monitor. He was terrified. Deep down, he knew the house of cards was shaking. Up in the penthouse, I took one last look in the mirror. Kiara Winterbourne stared back. My eyes were clear. My jaw was set. I looked like a queen who had just put on her war paint. "It is time," I said to Elias. "The board is seated, ma'am," Elias confirmed. "Security is positioned outside the doors. The FBI team is in the adjacent holding room, monitoring the feed." "Let them wait 5 minutes," I said, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. "Let Declan and his friends sit in that room and stew. Let them wonder. Fear is a powerful appetizer." I walked out of the dressing suite and down the long corridor that connected the penthouse to the grand boardroom. The heels of my Louboutins clicked rhythmically on the marble floor, a sound like a ticking clock, counting down the seconds of their careers. I stopped at the double doors. They were massive, made of frosted glass and steel. Through them, I could see the blurred shapes of the people inside. I could hear the low hum of nervous conversation. I placed my hand on the door handle. The metal was cool. Inside that room were the people who had mocked me, the husband who had betrayed me, and the parasites who were bleeding my creation dry. They expected an old man. They expected a promotion. They expected to get away with it. I pushed the doors open. The silence that followed was heavy, absolute, and delicious. The grand boardroom on the 45th floor was a cathedral of corporate power. It was a space designed to intimidate, to awe, and to remind anyone who stepped inside that they were merely a guest in the house of God. The walls were paneled in rare, endangered mahogany that had been harvested before environmental regulations made such luxury impossible. The floor was a slab of polished black granite that reflected the ceiling lights like a dark, frozen lake. But the true centerpiece was the view. The entire north wall was a single sheet of floor-to-ceiling bulletproof glass. From here, the city looked like a circuit board, a sprawling grid of lights and movement that seemed insignificant from this height. The people down there were ants. The cars were toys. Up here, the air was thin and recycled, filtered to a purity that felt almost sterile. I sat at the head of the massive table in the high-backed leather chair that was reserved for the chairman. I had swiveled it around so that I was facing the window, my back to the room. I wanted to watch the city. I wanted to feel the hum of the building beneath me. But mostly, I wanted to deny them the satisfaction of seeing my face until the trap had fully snapped shut. Behind me, the room was filled with a silence so heavy it felt physical. The 12 members of the board of directors were seated along the sides of the table. These were men and women who controlled industries. There was the former governor. There was the CEO of a major banking conglomerate. There was a retired admiral. They were not people who were easily silenced, but today, they sat like statues. I had briefed them 10 minutes ago. I had shown them the preliminary evidence. I had told them who I really was. The shock had been palpable, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, righteous fury. They were not just angry about the embezzlement. They were insulted. They had been played for fools by a group of mid-level managers who treated their company like a frat house. Now, they waited with the patience of executioners. I checked the time on my diamond-encrusted watch. 11 o'clock. The heavy double doors at the far end of the room swung open. The sound of laughter spilled in first, jarring and inappropriate against the tomb-like stillness of the boardroom. "I am telling you, the bonus structure is going to be insane," I heard Declan's voice booming. "We are talking new cars. Boys, I might finally upgrade to the Porsche." "Porsche," Brad scoffed. "Get a boat. It is a tax write-off if you name it after the company." They swaggered in. Declan led the pack, followed by Brad, Trent, Mason, and Greg. They were flushed, their ties loosened slightly, their confidence bolstered by the assumption that they were walking into a coronation. Then they stopped. The laughter died in their throats, as if someone had cut their vocal cords. They took in the scene, the board of directors, all 12 of them, staring in stony silence, the lack of champagne, the lack of fanfare, and most disturbingly, the arrangement of the room. In the center of the open floor space, between the main table and the door, 5 solitary wooden chairs had been arranged in a semicircle. They were simple, hard-backed chairs, completely out of place in this room of leather and luxury. They faced the main table. They faced me. They looked like the dock in a courtroom, or perhaps the firing posts in front of a wall. "What is this?" Declan asked, his voice echoing in the quiet room. He tried to maintain his smile, but it faltered, twitching at the corners. "Is this some kind of role-playing workshop? A leadership exercise?" No one answered. The Admiral simply folded his arms across his chest and stared at Declan with eyes like flint. Declan looked around, his bravado beginning to crack. He spotted Sarah, the HR director, standing near the wall by the door. She was holding a tablet, her knuckles white. "Sarah," Declan demanded, stepping toward her. "What is going on? Where is the chairman? We were summoned for a strategic assembly." Sarah did not flinch. She looked at him, and for the first time in her career, she did not look afraid. She looked at him with a mixture of profound pity and absolute disgust. It was the look one gives to a man who has stepped off a cliff but has not yet realized gravity is taking hold. "Take a seat, Mr. Sterling," Sarah said softly. Her voice was not a request. It was an order. "Excuse me." Declan bristled, his face reddening. "You do not tell me what to do. I am the incoming vice president. I want to see the chairman, now." "I said sit down," Sarah repeated, pointing to the 5 wooden chairs in the center of the room. Brad laughed nervously. "Okay, this is weird. Is this a hazing ritual? Do we have to sit in the hot seat before we get the check?" "Just sit down, you idiots," Trent hissed. his survival instincts kicking in faster than the others. He moved to one of the chairs and sat, looking small and exposed in the middle of the vast room. Slowly, reluctantly, the others followed. Declan was the last to sit. He threw himself into the center chair, crossing his arms and glaring at the back of my head. He still did not know who I was. He only saw the high back of the chairman's chair, a figure shrouded in mystery. "Fine," Declan announced loudly, addressing the back of my chair. "We are sitting. Can we get on with this? I have a department to run. We do not all have the luxury of staring out the window all day." I smiled. He was digging his grave with an excavator. I pressed a button on the armrest of my chair. Thwack! The heavy blackout curtains on the side windows slammed shut automatically. Click! The overhead lights extinguished instantly. The room was plunged into total darkness, save for the faint ambient glow of the city grid bleeding through the north window in front of me. "Hey!" Brad shouted. "What the hell?" A single blinding spotlight snapped on. It originated from the ceiling directly above the main table. Cutting through the darkness like a blade, it illuminated only one thing: the high-backed chair where I sat. It bathed me in a halo of white light. But because my chair was still turned away, I remained a silhouette, a shadow against the brightness. Then, the massive screen on the east wall, a screen that spanned 20 feet, flickered to life. It did not show a PowerPoint presentation on quarterly earnings. It did not show a graph of stock performance. It showed a video feed in crystal clear 4K resolution. The timestamp in the corner read, "Today, 9:15 in the morning." The audio kicked in. It had been professionally remastered by my security team in the last hour. Every frequency was balanced, every whisper amplified. The sound filled the room, coming from hidden surround sound speakers that made it feel like the voices were inside everyone's head. "Pick it up!" Brad's voice boomed from the speakers. On the screen, a woman in a brown suit, Kira Wins, was trembling as she reached for a folder on the floor. In the dark room, I heard a sharp intake of breath from the real Brad. "That is," Brad whispered, "that is from this morning." The video continued. The resolution was unforgiving. It showed the sneer on Declan's face. It showed the lust in Trent's eyes. It showed the sheer, unadulterated malice of the wolf pack. "Can you handle stress relief?" Trent's voice drawled on the recording, loud and grotesque. "If you are willing to be a personal assistant," emphasis on the personal. In the boardroom, the real Trent let out a whimpering sound. I could hear him shifting in his wooden chair, the legs scraping against the granite floor. The video cut to a close-up of Declan. His face on the screen was 10 feet tall, every pore visible, every ounce of arrogance magnified. "Code of ethics," the recorded, Brad howled with laughter. "Oh, that is rich. Did you hear that?" "Declan?" "She wants to know about the code of ethics." The board members shifted. I could feel their collective judgment radiating like heat. This was not hearsay. This was not an anonymous complaint. This was a documentary of corruption. Then came the climax of the footage. "Let me tell you a secret, Kira," the recorded Declan whispered, his voice booming through the boardroom like the voice of a doomed god. "The code of ethics is for the little people. It is for the worker bees in the cubicles downstairs. It is to keep them in line. It does not apply to us." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the breathing seemed to stop. On screen, Declan stood up and slammed a paperweight onto the table. "I am the law here. I can fire anyone I want. I can fire the VP of marketing. I can fire the head of R&D. Hell, I could fire my own wife if she worked here." The video froze on that frame. Declan's face, twisted in a snarl of power, was frozen on the giant screen, looming over the real Declan who sat shrinking in his wooden chair. "She is useless too," the audio continued, playing the final dagger. "Just sits at home, playing with her little blog, spending my money. I have to carry her through life just like I would have to carry you. It is exhausting." The video ended. The screen went black. For 10 seconds, nobody moved. Then, The sound of plastic hitting granite shattered the silence. Brad had dropped his phone. His hands were shaking so violently he could not hold it. "Oh God," Brad whispered. "Oh God. Oh God." "Who?" Declan's voice was a rasp, a dry, broken thing. "Who recorded that? That is illegal. You cannot film us without consent. I will sue. I will sue this entire company." He was still trying, even now, faced with his own reflection. He was trying to bully his way out. "Who is in that chair?" Declan screamed, standing up and pointing a trembling finger at my silhouette. "Turn around. You think you can intimidate me? I bring in the revenue. I am Vanguardia." I did not turn around. Not yet. I leaned forward toward the microphone built into the armrest of my chair. "I hear," I said, my voice low, calm, and amplified to fill every corner of the room, "that you are looking for high-quality personnel." The effect was instantaneous. Declan froze. He knew that voice. He had heard that voice every morning for 3 years. He had heard that voice ask him how his eggs were cooked. He had heard that voice whisper, "I love you," before he went to sleep. But he had never heard it like this. He had never heard it stripped of warmth, stripped of love, and infused with the cold, hard steel of absolute authority. He staggered back, his legs hitting the wooden chair and sending it toppling over with a loud clatter. "That voice," Declan whispered, his face draining of color until he looked like a wax figure. No, it is impossible. You said your wife was useless." "Declan," I continued, speaking to the window, watching his reflection in the glass. "You said she was a burden. You said she was a comfortable old sofa that you did not have to worry about scratching." "Kiara," he choked out. "Kiara, is that you?" "Sit down, Declan," I commanded. "But how?" He was hyperventilating now. "You are at home. You are nobody. Sit down." The command cracked like a whip. Declan collapsed back onto his chair, not because he wanted to obey, but because his legs simply gave out. "Brad Haynes," I said, moving down the line. "You asked the applicant if she had dropped the toast. You mocked her poverty. Tell me, Brad, how much was the bill for the bottle of scotch you drank last night, the one you charged to the client retention account?" Brad made a sound like a dying animal. He put his head in his hands, rocking back and forth. "Trent Miller," I said. "You offered a job in exchange for sex, a felony, and a violation of human decency so profound it makes me question how you sleep at night." Trent was staring at the floor, tears streaming down his face. "It was a joke," he sobbed. "It was just a joke." "And you, Declan," I said, letting his name hang in the air. "You said you wished you could fire your wife. You said you wanted the pleasure of watching her face when you told her she was not good enough." I placed my hands on the armrests of the chair. I took a deep breath. The moment had arrived. The unveiling. "Well, Declan," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream, "you are about to get your wish, except I do not think it is going to go quite the way you imagined." I pressed the button. The mechanism in the base of the chair engaged. Slowly, smoothly, the chair began to rotate. As I turned from the window to face the room, the spotlight caught the diamonds around my neck. They fractured the light, sending 1,000 razor-sharp rainbows dancing across the dark walls. I sat with my legs crossed, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I looked at the 5 men who had destroyed lives for sport. I looked at the man who had promised to cherish me. I locked eyes with Declan. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked at my face, the face he had woken up next to for 1,000 days, and he looked at the power that radiated from me. He looked at the board of directors who were looking at me with deference. And in that split second, Declan Sterling died. The arrogant executive, the golden boy, the future vice president, he ceased to exist. All that was left was a terrified little boy realizing he had been throwing stones at a sleeping dragon. "Hello, darling," I said, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Welcome to your performance review," The chair completed its rotation, locking into place with a definitive metallic click that echoed like the racking of a shotgun slide. I sat there, bathed in the unforgiving white glare of the spotlight. A tableau of absolute, frozen perfection. I was no longer the woman in the beige dress who faded into the wallpaper at parties. I was no longer the desperate, hunched figure of Kira Wins who had begged for a crumb of dignity in the morning. I was the architect. My charcoal Armani suit was armor, tailored to within a millimeter of my life. My hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant chignon that exposed the sharp line of my jaw, and around my neck, the raw diamond necklace worth more than Declan's entire lifetime earnings glittered with a cold, predatory fire. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody breathed. The air in the room seemed to solidify, trapping us all in amber. Declan was the first to move. He did not stand. He crumpled. It was as if the strings holding up his marionette body had been severed. He gripped the edge of his wooden chair, his knuckles turning the color of old bone. He blinked. Once, twice, 3 times, his brain desperately trying to reject the visual input it was receiving. "Kiara," he croaked. The name came out as a question, a plea, and a curse all at once. He shook his head violently, a nervous, jerky motion. He looked around the room, searching for the punchline, for the camera crew, for the explanation that would restore his world to its rightful axis. What are you doing here?" he stammered, his voice rising in pitch. He pointed a shaking finger at me, then at the empty chair beside me. Did you sneak in? Did you seduce the chairman to get in here?" He let out a short, hysterical laugh. "Oh my God, that is it, isn't it? You are sleeping with the chairman. You are his secretary. You are his mistress." It was a breathtaking display of misogyny, even in the face of annihilation. His mind could only conceive of a woman in this room in 2 roles, a servant or a sexual object. He literally could not imagine a scenario where I belonged at the head of the table. "You have to leave, Kiara," Declan hissed, trying to regain some shred of authority. "You are going to get us both in trouble. Get out of that chair before the real owner comes back. Do you have any idea how much trouble you are in?" I did not speak. I did not blink. I simply watched him flail. From the shadows near the door, Elias stepped forward. He moved with the silent grace of a predator. His footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He walked past the wolf pack, ignoring their gaping mouths, and came to stand at my right hand. He held a leather-bound portfolio against his chest. Elias looked at Declan. His expression was not angry. It was not mocking. It was the blank, professional indifference of a mortician. "Mr. Sterling," Elias said, his voice calm and carrying to the back of the room. "You seem confused." "Confused?" Declan sputtered, standing up on shaky legs. "My fiancé is sitting in the chairman's seat. She is having a psychotic break. Get security. Get her out of here." Elias turned to me. He bowed his head, a deep, respectful bow that he had never given to anyone else in this company. "Madam Chairwoman," Elias said, "the security teams are in position. The federal agents are standing by. We are ready to proceed at your command." The silence that followed was louder than an explosion. Declan froze. His mouth hung open, a silent scream of denial dying in his throat. Brad dropped his face into his hands. Trent looked like he was going to vomit. "Madam, Chairwoman," Declan whispered. He looked from Elias to me, and then back to Elias. "What did you call her?" "Allow me to make the formal introduction," Elias said. Turning back to the room, he swept his hand toward me. "Gentlemen, you are addressing Ms. Kiara Winterbourne. She is the founder of the Winterbourne Group. She is the majority shareholder of Vanguardia Holdings. She is the owner of the building you are standing in. She is the architect." "No," Declan said. It was a small, weak sound. "No, that is a lie." He looked at the board of directors. He looked at the retired admiral, at the banking CEO. He was begging them to laugh. to tell him this was a cruel joke, but the board members did not laugh. They nodded. "Good morning, Ms. Winterbourne," the Admiral said, his voice gravelly and respectful. "Thank you for convening this assembly." The reality hit Declan like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered back, his legs hitting the wooden chair again. He looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time in 3 years, he saw the diamonds, he saw the suit, he saw the way I sat, not like a comfortable old sofa, but like a throne. "Owner," Declan gasped. But you are broke. You are a freelancer. You write blogs. You sell knitted scarves on the internet. I pay the rent. I pay for everything. You pay for nothing," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a razor wire. I stood up. I did not rush. I rose slowly, unfolding my full height. In my heels, I stood nearly 6 feet tall, towering over Declan's seated form. I picked up the thick stack of financial dossiers that had been resting on the table in front of me. They were heavy, bound in black leather, containing 5 years of forensic accounting. I lifted the stack and let it drop. Slam! The sound was thunderous. It echoed off the mahogany walls, making the water glasses on the table tremble. Brad flinched as if I had shot a gun. Trent let out a small squeak of terror. "This," I said, resting my hand on the files, "is the documentation of my useless job while you were busy padding your expense reports for vintage wine. I was negotiating trade deals in Singapore while you were laughing at my budget dress. I was acquiring the textile firm that made it. While you were bragging about being a vice president, I was the one signing your paycheck." I walked around the edge of the table, moving into the open space. I approached the 5 wooden chairs. The wolf pack shrank back, terrified of the woman they had mocked only hours ago. I stopped in front of Declan. He was trembling so violently his teeth were chattering. "You called me a parasite, Declan," I said softly, looking down at him. "You told your friends I was a burden. You told your mother I was dragging you down." I laughed. A cold, humorless sound. "I bought Vanguardia 5 years ago to save it from bankruptcy," I revealed. "I did it anonymously because I wanted to see if the people running it were worth saving. I wanted to see if you were worth saving. I gave you a job. I gave you a career. I gave you a life." I leaned in closer. My face inches from his. I could smell the fear on him. It smelled like sweat and cheap hair gel. "I am not the parasite, Declan," I whispered. "I am the host, and you are the infection." Declan looked up at me, his eyes wide and wet with tears. "Kiara, please, baby, I didn't know. If I had known." "If you had known—" "What?" I asked, straightening up. "You would have treated me with respect. You would have been kind. You would not have cheated on me with your secretary." I never—" He started to lie, instinct taking over. I pointed to the giant screen behind me. "Do not insult my intelligence," I snapped. "I own the servers. I own the email archive. I own the phone lines. I have read every text. I have heard every voicemail. I know about Jessica. I know about the apartment you rented for her using company funds. I know about the diamond earrings you bought her for her birthday last week, earrings that cost $3,000 more than the engagement ring you gave me." The color drained from his face completely. He looked like a corpse. "You knew," he whispered, "the whole time." "I have known for 6 months," I said. "I waited. I watched. I let you dig your hole deeper and deeper. I wanted to see how far you would go. I wanted to see if there was a bottom to your depravity." I turned to the rest of the group. Brad was staring at the floor, refusing to look at me. Trent was weeping silently. "And you gentlemen," I said, my voice dripping with disdain, "the wolf pack, the masters of the universe, you thought you were untouchable. You thought the rules did not apply to you." I walked over to Brad. I reached out and tapped the shoulder of his suit, a suit he had bought with stolen money. "You told Kira Wins to go to a homeless shelter," I reminded him. You laughed at a mother who could not pay her rent. You thought it was funny. Brad looked up. His face streaked with tears. I am sorry, he blabbered. I was just following Declan. It was just a joke. Please. Ms. Winterbourne, I have a mortgage. My wife is pregnant. And Kira Wynns had 2 children, I retorted. Did you care about them? Did you care about her rent? But she wasn't real, Brad cried. It was just a setup. The character was fake, I said, my voice hardening. But your cruelty was real. Your hatred for the poor was real. Your willingness to abuse your power was very, very real. That is what I was testing. And you failed. You all failed. I walked back to the head of the table. I stood there, silhouetted against the dark window, the city lights framing me like a halo of judgment. You wanted to know who the chairman was, I said. You wanted to meet the boss. Well, here I am. I picked up a remote control from the table. Elias, I commanded. Lights, full brightness. The overhead lights slammed on. The sudden brightness was blinding, stripping away the shadows, exposing every bead of sweat, every tear, every terrified expression in the room. There was nowhere to hide. Lock the doors, I ordered. The heavy double doors groaned as the magnetic locks engaged with a solid, definitive thud. The sound echoed in the room like the closing of a casket. Nobody leaves, I said, looking at the 5 men huddled in their chairs. Nobody moves, nobody speaks. I looked at the board of directors. We have a lot of work to do today, I told them. We are going to clean this house. We are going to scour every inch of rot from this company, and we are going to start right here, in the center of the room. I turned back to Declan. He was slumped in his chair, looking at his hands. He looked small. He looked broken. He looked like exactly what he was, a small man who had cast a large shadow only because the sun had been shining behind him, and I had just turned out the sun. The interview is over, gentlemen, I announced. Now, the sentencing begins. I began to circle the cluster of wooden chairs, my heels clicking against the granite floor like the slow, rhythmic ticking of a countdown clock. I moved with the predatory grace of a panther stalking trapped prey. My eyes fixed on the back of Declan's head. He was trembling so violently that the wood of his chair vibrated against the floor, a low rattling sound that filled the silence of the room. Do you know why I did it? Declan, I asked, my voice soft but carrying to every corner of the vast boardroom. Do you know why I bought Vanguardia Holdings 5 years ago and hid behind a shell company? Do you know why I let you believe I was just a struggling freelancer? He did not answer. He could not answer. He was gasping for air, his hands gripping his knees as if holding on to the last shreds of his sanity. I did it for us, I said, stopping directly behind him and leaning down to whisper into his ear. I did it because I was already wealthy when we met. I had already built 2 fortunes. I knew that money changes people. It attracts sharks. It attracts liars. I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I could buy. So I created a test. I created a life where we were equals, where you had to work for your success, and where I supported you with my small income. I straightened up and walked around to face him. I gave you the greatest gift a partner can give, I continued, my voice hardening. I gave you the opportunity to rise on your own merit. I secretly cleared the path for you. I told the previous CEO to hire you. I approved your transfers. I made sure your department got the best leads. All I wanted was to see you grow into a man of integrity. I looked at the pathetic figure before me. But you did not grow, I said, disgust dripping from every syllable. You rotted. I pointed to the massive screen on the wall. The image changed. It was no longer the video of the interview. It was now a spreadsheet, a detailed, forensic breakdown of Declan's personal finances, cross-referenced with company accounts. I gave you a chance, I stated, and you used my own money to humiliate me. No, Declan whispered, shaking his head. Kiara, please. Look at the screen. Declan, I commanded. He flinched, forcing his eyes to the display. Transaction date, January 12th. I read aloud. Recipient Luxury Leasing Corporation. Amount $4,500. Memo Corporate Housing. I paused, letting the numbers sink in. We do not have corporate housing in that district, I said, cold and sharp. I checked the address. It is a one-bedroom apartment in the Heights. And do you know who lives there? Declan squeezed his eyes shut. Don't, he begged. Jessica. I said the name like a curse. Your secretary, the woman you were groping at our engagement party last night. You are not just cheating on me. Declan, you are paying for your mistress's rent with funds embezzled from the company I own. You are using my money to sleep with another woman. The board of directors let out a collective gasp. The audacity of the theft was staggering. It was not just financial fraud. It was a level of personal disrespect that was almost impressive in its vileness. Declan choked. I can explain. She was having a hard time. It was a loan. A loan. I laughed. A sharp, biting sound. And the diamond earrings. Was that a loan? The weekend trip to Cabo San Lucas, charged to the professional development account, was that a loan? I turned away from him, leaving him to wither under the weight of his own sins. I focused my attention on Trent Miller. Trent was sitting on the edge of his chair, sweat pouring down his face, trying to make himself invisible. When my gaze landed on him, he whimpered. And you? Trent, I said, walking toward him. The man who thinks sexual coercion is a job perk. The man who told a desperate mother she could get a job if she became your night assistant. I was joking, Trent stammered, his hands raised in surrender. Ms. Winterbourne, I swear, it was just locker room talk. I love my wife. I would never actually do it. You love your wife? I asked, raising an eyebrow. That is interesting, because when I found the recording of your little interview this morning, I thought she might want to hear it too. Transparency is one of Vanguardia's core values. After all, Trent went pale. What did you do? I sent a car for her, I said calmly. I told her there was an emergency involving her husband. I believe she is waiting in the executive antechamber right now. I nodded to the security guard standing by the side door. Let Mrs. Miller in. The door opened. A woman stepped in. She looked terrified, clutching her purse, her eyes darting around the room until they landed on her husband. It was Mary Miller. I had met her at company picnics. She was a sweet woman who taught kindergarten. Trent, she asked, her voice trembling. What is going on? They said it was urgent. Mary, Trent stood up, his face a mask of panic. Mary, honey, listen to me. Whatever you hear, it is a misunderstanding. It is a corporate game. They are trying to set me up. Play the audio, I commanded Elias. The speakers crackled to life. Trent's voice, loud and unmistakable, filled the room. If you are willing to be a personal assistant, emphasis on the personal, I might be able to convince Declan to overlook the fact that you dress like a librarian. The color drained from Mary's face. She stood frozen, the words hitting her like physical blows. She looked at Trent, then at the screen where the transcript was displayed, and then back to Trent. Mary, Trent pleaded, reaching for her. Baby, it was just a joke. I was just testing her. Mary walked forward. She moved slowly, her face devoid of expression. She stopped right in front of him. A joke, she whispered. Yes. Trent nodded frantically. Just a joke. Mary raised her hand and slapped him. The sound was sharp and loud, echoing off the mahogany walls like a gunshot. Trent's head snapped to the side. A bright red handprint bloomed instantly on his cheek. You are disgusting, Mary spat, her voice shaking with rage. I am taking the kids. Do not come home. She turned and walked out of the room, her head held high, leaving her husband destroying in her wake. The door clicked shut. Trent collapsed back into his chair, sobbing into his hands. Now that we have handled domestic affairs, I said, turning back to the center of the room, let us return to the main event. I walked back to Declan. He was staring at the floor, defeated, but I was not done. I had to strip away every layer of his arrogance until there was nothing left but the truth. "You like to talk about your family." "Declan," I said. "The Sterlings, the dynasty. You told everyone at the party that your father was a retired executive, a man of influence." Declan did not look up. "Another lie," I declared. I pressed the remote. The screen updated again. This time, it showed a bankruptcy filing from 10 years ago. "Arthur Sterling filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy a decade ago," I revealed to the room. "He lost everything, his pension, his house, his savings. He has not held a job since." I looked at Declan with pitying eyes. "Who pays his mortgage?" "Declan," I asked. "Who pays for his country club membership? Who pays for your mother's charity lunches?" "Stop," Declan whispered. "You do?" I said relentlessly. "Or rather, I do. You have been funneling Vanguardia funds into a shell account under your father's name for 3 years. You put him on the payroll as a strategic consultant. We have paid Arthur Sterling $200,000 a year to sit on his couch and watch golf." I leaned in close. "Your parents are not wealthy aristocrats," I hissed. "They are welfare recipients living off stolen money, money that I earned, money that belonged to this company. And the best part," I continued, stepping back and gesturing to the window, toward the distant lake where the party had been held. "The engagement party, the lake house." Declan looked up, confusion warring with his fear. "What about it?" "You told everyone it was your family's estate," I said. "You told me your grandfather built it." I laughed again. And this time, the board members joined in with low, dark chuckles. "Declan, you idiot," I said. "Vanguardia Holdings bought that property 5 years ago as a corporate retreat. It is in the asset register. I let your parents stay there as caretakers because they were destitute. I let them live in the guest cottage. But somehow, over the years, they convinced themselves they owned it." You own the lake house," Declan stammered. "I own the land. I own the house. I own the dock." I listed. "And last night, in my own living room, under my own roof, your mother had the audacity to call me a peasant. She made fun of my dress in a house that I pay the heating bill for. She called me a parasite while drinking wine that I bought, in a house that I own, paid for by a son who is stealing from me." The sheer, monumental irony of it seemed to crush him. He looked like he could not breathe. The reality of his life was dissolving. Everything he thought was real, his status, his family's wealth, his superiority, was a fabrication financed by the woman he had scorned. Declan slid off his chair. He did not stand up. He sank to his knees on the hard granite floor. It was a pathetic sight. The man who had strutted like a peacock was now kneeling at my feet, surrounded by the people he had tried to impress. "Kiara," he wept, reaching out to grab the hem of my trousers. I stepped back, avoiding his touch as if he were contagious. "Please, I am sorry. It was the pressure. You know how it is. I wanted to be the man you deserved. I wanted to give you everything." "You wanted to give me everything," I repeated incredulously. "You gave me nothing. Declan, you took everything." "I love you," he sobbed, the words bubbling up through his desperation. "I really do. We are getting married. We can fix this. I will pay it back. I will work for free. Just do not destroy me. Please, I am your fiancé." "Fiancé," I said, testing the word. It tasted like ash. I looked down at my left hand. I was not wearing the ring. I had left it in the pocket of my blazer. I reached into my pocket and pulled it out. The 2-carat diamond caught the light, sparkling with a deceitful brilliance. "This ring," I said, holding it up for the room to see. "You told me you saved for 6 months to buy it. You told me it was a symbol of your sacrifice." I walked over to the main table, where a crystal pitcher of water sat on a silver tray. "Elias," I said, "pull up the transaction for the ring." The screen flashed one final time. Transaction Tiffany and Company. $12,000. Source account. Vanguardia Children's Charity Fund. A wave of real, Stunned silence moved through the room. Even the most unshakable faces on the board looked rattled. "You took from the children's fund," I said, my voice unsteady with anger I could barely keep contained. "Money meant for sick children and orphans, and you used it to buy me a ring, just to feed your own ego." I looked at Declan. He had sunk to the floor, crying openly. "You turned me into part of it." I said, "I wore this ring. I showed it off. I felt proud. And all that time, I was carrying around something paid for with money that was never yours to touch. Money meant to help children who needed it." I stared at the ring one last time. It was beautiful, and suddenly, it felt unbearable. "I can't wear this again," I said quietly. "Not for another second." I let it slip from my fingers into the pitcher of water. A soft splash. It sank to the bottom, settling among the ice cubes cold, silent, and strangely final. "That is where your marriage proposal belongs, Declan," I said. At the bottom of a cold, dark place, I turned back to the board. I composed myself, smoothing my jacket. "We are done with the emotional theatrics," I announced, my voice returning to the icy professional tone of the architect. "Now we move to the legal reality," I signaled Elias. He stepped forward and placed a heavy box on the table. He opened it, revealing stacks of dossiers stamped with the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. "You think this is just about losing your job?" I asked the 5 men cowering in the center of the room. "You think you will just walk out of here and find work at a competitor?" I shook my head. "I did not just document policy violations," I said. "I documented federal crimes, wire fraud, embezzlement, insider trading, tax evasion, conspiracy." I looked at Declan, who was looking up at me with the eyes of a condemned man. "I am not just the owner, Declan," I whispered. "I am the witness, I am the prosecutor, and I have handed every single piece of evidence to the FBI. Federal prison," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "Minimum sentence for the amount you stole is 10 years, maximum is 20. So please," I said, gesturing to the door where heavy footsteps could now be heard approaching, "save your tears for the judge. You are going to need them." The doors burst open, but this time, it was not a tea lady. It was a squad of agents in windbreakers emblazoned with 3 yellow letters, FBI. Declan screamed. It was a long, high-pitched sound of pure terror, and for the first time all day, I smiled, a real smile. "You think the punishment is unemployment?" I asked, my voice echoing in the stunned silence of the boardroom. I looked down at Declan, who was still kneeling on the granite floor, his expensive suit trousers stained with the water from the spilled pitcher. "You think you will just pack a cardboard box, walk out to the parking lot, and update your resume? You think you will go to a competitor and tell them you left due to creative differences?" I shook my head slowly, allowing a small, pitying smile to touch my lips. "No, Declan, that is the thinking of an amateur. That is the thinking of a man who believes the worst thing that can happen to him is a bruised ego. But I am not an amateur. I am the architect, and when I demolish a building, I do not just break the windows, I pull up the foundation." I turned my gaze toward the heavy double doors at the far end of the room. The magnetic locks were still engaged, the red lights glowing like warning beacons. "Open them," I commanded. Elias pressed a button on the wall panel. The magnetic seal disengaged with a heavy thud. The doors swung inward, but it was not security guards who entered. 6 men and women in dark blue windbreakers stepped into the boardroom. They moved with the synchronized, heavy-footed precision of government authority. On the back of their jackets, large yellow letters spelled out the end of the Wolfpack's world, FBI. And beside them, 2 agents in gray suits bearing the insignia of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Brad let out a sound that was half whimper, half scream. Trent scrambled backward in his chair, his legs tangling, until he fell onto the floor in a heap. "Federal agents," the lead FBI officer announced, his voice booming. "Nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them. Declan looked at the agents, then at me. His eyes were wide, rimmed with red, filled with a terror so absolute it bordered on madness. "Kiara," he whispered, "what did you do?" "I did my civic duty," I replied coldly. "I reported a crime. Several crimes, actually." I nodded to Elias. He stepped forward, opening a new leather folder. He did not look at his former colleagues. He looked at the paper, his voice steady and devoid of emotion, reading the epitaph of their lives. "The charges are as follows," Elias read, his voice cutting through the panic. "Against Declan Sterling, 4 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of embezzlement of corporate funds exceeding $500,000, 2 counts of falsifying financial records to conceal theft from a charitable organization." "No," Declan moaned, shaking his head. "It was a loan. I was going to pay it back." "Against Bradley Haynes," Elias continued, ignoring him. 6 counts of insider trading. You used privileged information regarding the impending merger with BioLife Systems to buy and sell stock options through a proxy account registered to your brother. The SEC has tracked every trade. The profit was $340,000. The penalty is prison." Brad was hyperventilating, clutching his chest. I heard rumors. Everyone does it." "Against Trent Miller and Mason Brooks," Elias read on. "Conspiracy to commit money laundering. You set up a fake vendor, Apex Strategic Solutions, to bill the company for non-existent consulting services. The money was then funneled into offshore accounts. That is a federal racketeering charge. Oh, and let us not forget the civil rights violations regarding the systematic harassment and intimidation of female employees, which the Department of Labor is very interested in." The lead FBI agent stepped forward, holding a pair of steel handcuffs. They glinted under the harsh boardroom lights. "Declan Sterling," the agent said. "Stand up." Declan did not stand. He could not. He was paralyzed. 2 agents moved in, grabbing him by the armpits and hauling him to his feet. He hung between them like a rag doll, his feet dragging on the floor. "You have the right to remain silent," the agent recited, spinning Declan around and slamming him against the mahogany table. The sound of the cuffs ratcheting shut was sharp and final. Click, click. "You can't do this!" Declan screamed. Suddenly finding his voice, he twisted against the agents, his face pressed against the polished wood. "She is my wife. She is doing this for revenge. It is a domestic dispute. You cannot arrest me because of a bad breakup." I walked over to him. I leaned down so my face was level with his. "I am not your wife, Declan," I said softly. "We never signed the marriage license. Remember, you said you wanted to wait until after the promotion so the tax bracket would be better. You were so worried about saving a few $1,000s in taxes that you saved me from being legally bound to a felon." "You gaffed me!" Declan roared, spit flying from his mouth. "You set this up. You put that money there. You made me hire those people. It is entrapment." "Entrapment," I corrected him, "is when law enforcement induces a person to commit a crime they would not otherwise have committed. I did not induce you to steal from sick children to buy a ring." "Declan, I did not induce you to cheat on me. I did not induce you to launder money. All I did was turn on the lights. The cockroaches were already there." Across the room, the brotherhood of the wolf pack was disintegrating. Brad was being cuffed by a female agent. He was sobbing, snot running down his nose. "It was Declan," Brad shouted, pointing a cuffed hand at his best friend. "He made me do it. He said it was safe. He said he ran the department. I just did what he told me. I will testify. I will give you everything. Just do not put me in jail. My wife is pregnant." "Shut up, Brad," Declan yelled back. "You coward, you came up with the shell company idea." "He is the boss," Brad screamed at the agents. "He forced us. He said if we didn't help him skim the accounts, he would fire us. I was a victim. I am a victim here." I watched them turn on each other, the loyalty, the bros for life mantra, the late-night toasts. It all evaporated the moment the cold steel touched their wrists. They were not wolves. They were rats. scurrying to climb over each other to escape the rising water. "Take them away," I said, turning my back on them. "Wait," Declan shouted. "My assets. I can post bail. I have money. I have the house. I will fight this." I stopped. I turned back slowly. "Your assets?" I asked. I pulled a document from the pile on the table. It was stamped with a court seal. "While you were busy interviewing Kira Wins this morning," I said. "My legal team was busy with a federal judge. Given the overwhelming evidence of flight risk and the scale of the theft, we obtained an emergency freezing injunction." I held up the paper. "Your bank accounts are frozen. Declan, your investment portfolio is locked. The Mercedes in the parking lot. It has already been booted. You do not have a dime. You do not even have enough money to buy a phone call." "And the house?" Declan whispered. "My parents' house. The lake house." "I told you," I said. "I own the lake house, and as of 10 minutes ago, I have revoked the occupancy permit for your parents. Security is there now, changing the locks." As if on cue, the double doors opened one last time, but it was not more agents. It was Arthur and Patricia Sterling. They were dressed to the nines. Patricia was wearing a floor-length sequined gown that was entirely inappropriate for a morning meeting, and Arthur was wearing a tuxedo. They walked in beaming, holding a bottle of champagne, expecting to walk into a surprise party celebrating their son's promotion to vice president. "Surprise," Patricia trilled, stepping into the room. "We are here for the big news. Where is my successful bee?" Her voice died. She stopped. Arthur bumped into her, nearly dropping the champagne. They stared at the scene before them. They saw the FBI agents. They saw the board of directors sitting in grim silence, and they saw their son, their golden boy, pressed against a table, handcuffed, weeping, with an agent reading him his rights. "Declan," Patricia whispered. The bottle of champagne slipped from Arthur's hand. It hit the floor and shattered. The sound of breaking glass and the smell of expensive alcohol filled the room, a grotesque echo of the party they had enjoyed the night before. "Mom," Declan choked out. "Mom, help me." "What is happening?" Arthur demanded, his face turning purple. "Who are these people? Unhand my son. Do you know who we are?" "We are the Sterlings." "We know exactly who you are." "Mr. Sterling," the lead FBI agent said, stepping forward. "You are listed as the primary beneficiary of the laundry account. You are facing charges of receiving stolen property and conspiracy." "What?" Arthur gasped, clutching his chest. I thought that was his bonus money. He said it was a stipend." "Tell it to the judge," the agent said. Patricia looked around wildly. Her eyes landed on me. I was standing at the head of the table, the architect in full glory. "Kiara," she asked, blinking. Why are you wearing that suit? Why are you standing there? Tell them to stop. Tell them who Declan is." I walked slowly toward her. My heels crunched on the broken glass of the champagne bottle, the same vintage 1982 they had toasted with last night. "Hello, Patricia," I said, pleasant and cold. "Do something," she shrieked at me. "You useless girl. Don't just stand there. Call your... whatever. Your little lawyer friend, save him." "I am afraid I cannot do that," I said. "You see, I am the one who called them." Patricia's mouth worked soundlessly. "You..." "Yes," I said. "Me, the girl with the parasite hobby. The girl you told to get a job as a janitor." I leaned in, letting her see the diamonds, letting her see the power, letting her see the absolute destruction of her world in my eyes. "You were right about one thing, Patricia," I said softly. "My old job was a bit useless. It did not pay very well. But I think you will find my new job much more impressive." "What job?" she whispered, trembling. "Sending your son to federal prison," I said, "and evicting you from my property." "Evicting..." Arthur stammered. "But we live there." "Not anymore," I said. "My security team has already packed your bags. They are sitting on the curb outside the gate. I suggest you hurry. It looks like rain." You monster, Patricia hissed. We will be homeless. We have nowhere to go. I hear the homeless shelter down the street is hiring soup ladlers, I said, repeating Brad's words from the morning. It is honest work. You should try it. Take them out, I commanded the agents. Get this trash out of my boardroom. The agents began to move. They grabbed Declan, Brad, Trent, and the others, hauling them toward the door. Declan fought them. He twisted his head back to look at me one last time. I loved you, he screamed, a desperate, final lie. I loved you, Kiara. You loved my money, I shouted back, my voice finally rising, cracking with the sheer force of the truth. You love the reflection of yourself in my eyes. But that mirror is broken. Declan, it is broken. They dragged him through the doors. His screams echoed down the hallway. I am a vice president. I am a vice president. Fading slowly until they were cut off by the closing of the elevator doors. Brad was weeping loudly, begging for his mother. Trent was silent, in shock. Arthur and Patricia were escorted out behind them, not in handcuffs yet, but broken, humiliated, shuffling along in their finery like clowns at a funeral. The doors swung shut, the magnetic locks engaged. Thud. The silence returned to the boardroom, but it was different now. It was not the silence of tension. It was the silence of a storm that had passed, leaving the air scrubbed clean. I stood there, staring at the closed doors. My chest was heaving. My hands, finally, began to tremble. The board of directors watched me. They did not speak. They waited. I looked down at the table, the broken glass, the water, the empty chairs. It was done. The cancer was cut out. I turned to Elias. Get a cleaning crew in here, I said, my voice returning to a steady, professional rhythm. Get rid of the glass. Get rid of the chairs. Get rid of the smell of their cologne. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, Elias said. I looked at the board. My apologies for the theater, I said to them, but it was necessary to ensure the infection was fully removed. Now, we have a company to rebuild. Shall we begin? The Admiral stood up. He looked at me with a new expression. It was not just respect. It was something deeper. It was fear mixed with awe. We follow your lead, Ms. Winterbourne, he said. I sat down in the chairman's chair. I swiveled it around to face the window again, looking out at the city, far below. On the street, I could see the flashing lights of the police cars. I saw the tiny figures being loaded into the back of the vans. I watched as the cars pulled away, disappearing into the traffic of the city I owned. Goodbye, Declan, I whispered to the glass. I turned back to the table, opened the fresh file Elias had placed in front of me, and picked up my pen. Item number 1, I said. Restructuring the executive sales division. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom clicked shut, sealing the space once again. But the air inside had fundamentally changed. Gone was the tension of the reveal. Gone was the stench of Declan's fear and the perfumed arrogance of his parents. In its place was a silence that felt solid, heavy, and electric. It was the silence of a vacuum waiting to be filled by a new force. I stood at the head of the table, my hands resting on the polished mahogany. I looked at the 12 members of the board of directors. An hour ago, they had looked at me with curiosity. Now, they looked at me with a mixture of profound awe and terrified respect. They had just watched a woman they thought was a socialite dismantle a criminal conspiracy in real time. They realized that the useless wife was, in fact, the most dangerous person in the building. Gentlemen, I said, my voice steady and commanding. And ladies, what you just witnessed was unpleasant. It was ugly, but it was necessary. A gardener cannot plant new flowers until the weeds are pulled out by the roots. The Admiral cleared his throat, nodding slowly. It was decisive. Ms. Winterbourne, I have served in the Navy for 40 years, and I have rarely seen a tactical strike executed with such precision. Precision is the only way I operate, I replied. And now, we apply that same precision to the recovery. I signaled Elias. He stepped forward, placing a tablet in front of me. The FBI has the criminals, I announced. But the rot they left behind is still here. Declan Sterling built a culture of fear, nepotism, and exclusion. That ends today, right now. I tapped the screen, initiating a command I had scripted weeks ago. I am authorizing the immediate termination of every single manager who was brought in by Declan or his inner circle in the last 2 years, I said. That is 23 mid-level executives. Their access cards are being deactivated as we speak. Security is escorting them out. They are not being arrested, but they are being excised. We cannot build a future on a foundation of cronyism. But, Madam Chairwoman, the banking CEO interjected, looking nervous, that is a massive personnel vacuum. Operations will stall. Operations will struggle for a week, I countered. But they will survive. What will not survive is keeping toxic leadership in place. I would rather have an empty chair than a corrupted one. I swiped to the next slide on the main screen. Furthermore, I continued, we are establishing a restitution fund. $5 million, allocated immediately. Restitution, the board members murmured. For the victims, I said, my voice softening just a fraction as I remembered the elevator ride. I want Lisa Monroe and Emily Chen from the marketing department brought to my office tomorrow. I want every employee who was passed over for promotion, every woman who was harassed, every person who was mocked by the Wolfpack to be interviewed. If their claims are verified, they get a promotion, a raise, and a settlement check. We are not just apologizing, we are paying our debts. Lisa Monroe, Elias noted, typing on his device. The analyst from the elevator. Yes, I said. Make her the interim head of the department. She knows more about the workflow than Declan ever did. I looked around the room. We are going to be the gold standard for corporate culture, not because it is good PR, but because it is good business. Happy employees do not steal from you. Respected employees do not sell your secrets. The board nodded in unison. They were no longer questioning me. They were following me. Now, I said, straightening my jacket, it is time to let the rest of the company know who is flying the plane. I pressed the final button on my interface. Sending to all staff 432 recipients. The email is out, I declared. Effective immediately, the position of CEO is dissolved. The company will be run directly by the chairman's office. By me, no more shadows, no more architect, just Kiara Winterbourne. A soft chime echoed through the building, the sound of 5,000 inboxes receiving the news simultaneously. I could almost feel the shockwave rippling through the floors below. The whispers, the realization, the useless fiancé was the queen on the chessboard. Meeting adjourned, I said. I have a show to watch. I turned and walked toward the north window, the one overlooking the main plaza entrance of the building. Elias followed me, standing a respectful step behind. Down below, the scene was chaotic. I had not just called the FBI, I had called the press. A sea of media vans, satellite trucks, and reporters swarmed the front steps of Vanguardia Holdings. I had tipped them off an hour ago that a major executive arrest involving federal crimes was about to happen. They were hungry for blood. The automatic doors of the lobby slid open. First came the FBI agents, forming a wedge, then came the prisoners. From 45 stories up, they looked like dolls, but the high-definition cameras I had installed on the plaza fed the image to the screen in the boardroom behind me so I could see every detail. Declan was weeping. His head hung low, his expensive suit rumpled, his wrists bound in steel behind his back. The cameras flashed like a lightning storm, a relentless strobe of white light exposing his shame to the world. Reporters shoved microphones in his face, shouting questions. Mr. Sterling, is it true you embezzled from a charity? Declan, did you really try to frame your fiancé? He tried to turn away, to hide his face. But there was nowhere to go. The Wolfpack was being paraded like common criminals. Brad was sobbing so hard he had to be held up by 2 agents. Trent looked catatonic, and then the pièce de résistance. Arthur and Patricia Sterling were escorted out. They were not in handcuffs, but they might as well have been. They clutched each other, looking terrified as the cameras turned on them. Patricia tried to cover her face with her clutch, but it was too small to hide the ruin of her social standing. The headline tomorrow would not be about their son's promotion. It would be about the aristocratic grifters who lived off stolen charity money. I stood at the window, my hands clasped behind my back. I waited for the tears. I waited for the pang of lost love, the grief for the 3 years I had wasted on a man who saw me as an ATM machine. But the tears did not come. Instead, I felt a lightness. It was the feeling of taking off a heavy, wet coat after walking through a storm. I felt clean. I felt unburdened. The phantom weight of Declan's expectations, his criticism, his subtle emotional abuse. It was all gone, loaded into the back of a federal transport van. "Ms. Winterbourne?" Elias asked softly. I did not turn. "Yes, Elias." "The police are taking them to the processing center. Mr. Sterling will likely be allowed one phone call to a lawyer, though with his assets frozen, he will have to rely on a public defender." Elias paused. "Do you want to send a message? Is there anything you want to say to him? I can have a lawyer deliver a note." I watched as the police car doors slammed shut, sealing Declan inside his new reality. I watched the lights flash, blue and red, painting the plaza in the colors of justice. "No," I said. "I have nothing to say to him. His existence is no longer relevant to my algorithm." I turned away from the window, walking back toward the center of the room. "However," I added, a small, cold smile playing on my lips, "there is one administrative matter regarding his parents." "Arthur and Patricia?" Elias asked. "Yes, they lived in the lake house for 5 years. They consumed electricity, water, gas, and maintenance services. They treated it like their own manor while calling me a peasant." I sat down at the head of the table. "Send them a bill," I commanded. "Calculate the fair market rental value of a luxury lakefront estate for 60 months, add the utilities, add the landscaping fees, and add interest, compound interest." Elias smiled a rare, genuine smile. "That will be a substantial figure, ma'am, likely over $300,000. "Send it to their bankruptcy trustee," I said. "Make sure it is the first debt they see when they try to rebuild their lives. I want them to remember who paid for their roof every single time they look at a bill for the rest of their lives." My personal phone buzzed on the table. It was not a text from Declan this time. It was a call from an unknown number, but the area code was New York. I picked it up. "This is Kiara Winterbourne." "Ms. Winterbourne." A frantic male voice spoke on the other end. "This is Marcus Thorne, CEO of BioLife Systems. We just saw the news. The arrests, the FBI raid." "Hello, Marcus," I said calmly. "Listen, Kiara. I mean, Ms. Winterbourne," he stammered. "This looks bad. Really bad. We have a merger pending with Vanguardia, but with your senior leadership being hauled off in handcuffs for fraud. My board is freaking out. We are thinking we need to pull out, cancel the contract. We cannot be associated with this level of scandal." The room went quiet. The board members looked at me with alarm. The BioLife merger was the cornerstone of our 5-year strategy. If that deal collapsed, the stock would tank, and the victory would be hollow. I leaned back in my chair. I did not panic. I did not beg. "Marcus," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming the voice of the architect, "take a breath and listen to me very carefully." "But the scandal." "There is no scandal," I interrupted, my tone cutting him off like a guillotine. "What you saw on the news was not a company collapsing. It was a company being purified. I just cut out the cancer. I removed the liability. I personally orchestrated the investigation, the evidence gathering, and the arrests." I paused, letting the power of that statement sink in. "You are not merging with Declan Sterling," I said. "You are merging with me. And unlike my former fiancé, I do not steal, I do not lie, and I do not lose." You set this up?" Marcus asked. his voice changing from panic to intrigue. I cleaned house, I said. Vanguardia is leaner, cleaner, and more transparent than it has ever been. The stock took a dip this morning on the news. By this afternoon, when I announce the restructuring, it will bounce back. By tomorrow, when the market realizes I'm in charge, it will soar. I spun a pen between my fingers. If you pull out now, Marcus, you are walking away from the most secure investment of your career, and you are making an enemy of the woman who just put her own husband in federal prison for crossing her. Do you really want to be on my bad side? There was a long silence on the other end of the line. You are terrifying, Kiara, Marcus said finally, but there was admiration in his voice. I am efficient, Marcus, I corrected. So, are we partners, or do I need to call your competitor? We are partners, Marcus said quickly. The deal stands. I will tell my board to stand down. Smart choice, I said. I will see you at the signing next week. I hung up the phone and tossed it onto the table. The Admiral let out a low whistle. Remind me never to play poker with you, Madam Chairwoman. I do not play games, I said, standing up. I play to win. I walked over to the chairman's desk in the corner of the room, the desk that had sat empty for years, waiting for the reclusive German owner who never existed. I sat down in the leather chair. It fit me perfectly. Elias placed a single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper in front of me. It was an executive order, drafted and ready for my signature. The final item, ma'am, Elias said. I read the document. Executive Order 001, Subject Permanent Ban on Vendor/Personnel Entity, the Sterling Family. It is hereby ordered that the name Sterling is permanently blacklisted from all Vanguardia Holdings properties, subsidiaries, and affiliates. No individual bearing this name or relation to Declan Sterling shall be employed, contracted, or permitted entry onto company premises. This order is irrevocable. It was petty, it was vindictive, and it was absolutely perfect. I picked up my fountain pen, a Mont Blanc that I had bought with my first $1,000,000. The ink was black, permanent, and indelible. I signed my name at the bottom of the page. Kiara Winterbourne. The letters flowed across the page, sharp and angular. With that signature, I was not just ending a relationship, I was erasing them. I was ensuring that no matter where they went, no matter what they tried to do, the doors of my empire would be forever slammed in their faces. I capped the pen and handed the document to Elias. File it, I said, and frame a copy for the lobby. I spun the chair around to face the window one last time. The sun was setting now, casting long, golden shadows across the city. The storm clouds had cleared, leaving a sky of brilliant, bruising purple. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I saw the woman who had sat in the corner of a party in a beige dress, ignored and mocked. That woman was gone. In her place was a titan. I had lost a fiancé. I had lost a fake life. But I had gained my kingdom. Is there anything else, Madam Chairwoman? Elias asked, preparing to leave. I looked at the city lights flickering on below, 1,000,000 stars that I now controlled. No, Elias, I said, a smile curling the corner of my mouth, a smile of pure, unadulterated victory. We are done here. The game is over. I leaned back, closing my eyes for a moment to savor the silence. It wasn't empty, it was full of promise. Actually, I whispered to the empty room, the game has just begun. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal and ultimate justice. I hope you enjoyed seeing the Queen take her throne. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. Are you at work, at the gym, or relaxing at home? I would love to connect with you. And if you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Family Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this story with even more people. Until next time, stay strong and never let anyone underestimate you.